Hey there, everybody. Mr. Lewis here, ready to wrap up these final couple sections of Unit 5, Language in AP Human Geography, with sections 5.5, which is Diffusion of Language, and section 5.6, which is Extinction of Language. So, without further ado, final two sections, let's take a look. All right, 5.5, diffusion of language. And in section 5.4, we looked at the hearths of language and some of the origins of big language families that we find around the world today, the largest of which is the Indo-European language family. And even though this is the extent of where we find Indo-European languages used today, they had to get to that point, right? It didn't just start like this. The Indo-European language began with one proto-language in one location, and then it diffused to become the largest language family used around the world today. So, how did we get there? And first of all, where is that hearth? Well, the hearth of the Indo-European language family is somewhere between, as the name would suggest, India and Europe. So, in this map, we're looking at present-day Turkey is what this body of land would be right here, with Israel down here along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Here's Saudi Arabia, here's Egypt, so on and so forth. So India would be on our bottom right-hand corner, toward our bottom right-hand corner of this map, and Europe would be the top left-hand corner. So here's what historians think went down. And actually, there are two different theories behind this. There's the warrior thesis, which said that the Indo-European proto-language was established somewhere near the Caucasus, all right, in this region that connects Russia, Southwest Asia, and Europe. The body of land near Turkey and to the south of Russia is where we find a lot of early human activity. It's close to the Mesopotamian region that was really down here near Saudi Arabia in the Fertile Crescent, as it's called. And so the idea is that there was this language that developed in this region and diffused. Now, how it diffused is where the two different theories come in. The warrior thesis suggests that the language spread through conquest, that there were kingdoms that went out and conquered different lands, and in doing so, spread their language. The other idea is the farmer thesis, that really what we're looking at is nomads, nomadic farmers who were spreading their language as they looked for more fertile land throughout the seasons as weather changed, and began to trade, right? Participated in simple economics, simple trade, and in doing so, in looking for trade partners and seeking out more fertile land, they diffused their language. Well, either way, this is widely considered, this broad region here between Africa, Asia, and Europe, this is widely considered to be the hearth of the Proto-Indo-European language. And then it stemmed from there. So what we're going to see in this short video is how Indo-European languages diffused from modern-day Turkey. So again, this is a theory, right? There are different theories about exactly where the Proto-Indo-European language started, but we do find it in ancient Anatolian cultures. Eventually, those Anatolians become the Hittites, and there you can see that change. And the Hittite kingdom expanded their languages through conquest. And you can start to see all these different branches and languages that are forming. Specifically, as you look to the west, up into Europe here, there are three main language branches from the Indo-European family that we've discussed quite a bit. One is Germanic, one is Balto-Slavic, and one is Italic. Now, Balto-Slavic becomes Russian, Polish, a lot of languages that you would find in eastern parts of Europe. Germanic actually ends up becoming not just German, as you could probably guess, but also English. And italic ends up becoming all of the Romance languages, things like Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese. So take a look at how these different branches end up evolving into multiple languages. You can see the Slavic languages developing up here. We're hitting the year 0 now, so we're getting into the ADs, so to speak, or CE, the Common Era. And eventually, the Germanic languages start to split off a little bit here, Dutch, English, and then the Italian or Italic languages become French and Spanish and Portuguese. And you can see the Balto-Slavic languages have evolved quite a bit as well. And over here to the east, also very important, we see the Hindi language, which is stretching all the way to South Asia into India and is now the predominant language used in India today. And that's part of the Indo-Iranian branch of the Indo-European language. So you can start to see the extent of Indo-European languages and the influence of Indo-European languages into both Europe and all the way to India, as the name would suggest, Indo-European. And so this isn't the end of it though, right? We know that these languages are commonly used in other parts of the world too. If you look in the Americas, there are many of these Indo-European languages that have become the dominant languages in many of those countries. And relocation diffusion is largely to blame for this. And as we look at relocation diffusion, specifically as it relates to colonization, many of these European powers were bringing their languages with them around the world as they settled and colonized various regions of the world. So this is just showing you one map in the year 1800, and this is just one example from one year, but it's showing you the extent of some of these major colonial powers from Europe, such as the United Kingdom or France or Spain or Portugal, the UK being in red, the French Empire being in blue, Spanish in yellow, and Portuguese in green. And you can see these large swaths of territory in the Americas that each of these groups controlled, as well as some of their colonial power or colonies that they operated and controlled in Africa, India, and other parts of South Asia, Southeast Asia as well. So in a large way, these languages that are used in North and South America today, predominantly English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, these are largely due to the extent of colonial exploration throughout the past 500 years. And so as we think about diffusion, it's really important to know the hearth, like we saw in this video, and where things originally diffused to, and of course how that happened, right? The warrior thesis or the farmer thesis. But looking at today's languages on this map, the dominant languages used throughout the world today, you can see that this has been influenced largely by this period of exploration and colonization by European powers. You know, you look at the United Kingdom itself, right here, this very small country when compared to the rest of the world in purple, but when you look at where the English language is dominant today, is the most spoken language today around the world, which stemmed from the British Empire, it's just pretty incredible to see the impact that such a small country could have, right? This language, in terms of where English was originally used, was fairly isolated. But then, because the British Empire came to be so dominant and so widespread, English becomes the most commonly spoken language in the world today. And this is diffusion. This is this relocation diffusion through colonization. And of course, that doesn't exactly have a very positive history to it, colonization itself, but we're looking simply at how English came to be the dominant language in the world today, how Spanish came to be the dominant language in Central America, Mexico, and South America, how Portuguese came to be spoken by more people outside of Portugal than inside of Portugal. And again, all those answers go back to colonization. Now, when we're looking at, say, Hindi, well, that's more through classic diffusion, not necessarily colonization, but relocation diffusion. When you look at Arabic, Arabic was largely spread through the warrior thesis, through the conquering of many lands by the early Muslim caliphates, these kingdoms of the early days of Islam, and predominantly today, many areas in the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa that are still predominantly Muslim use the Arabic language as their official language. So finally, section 5.6, extinction, revival, endangered languages, that's what we're looking at here. And this is the final section of Unit 5. So there are three key terms you really need to know the difference between: endangerment, extinction, and being a dead language. An endangered language, it has a dangerously low number of indigenous or native speakers. In fact, 43% of the world's 6,000 approximately languages are endangered. Almost half of the world's languages are endangered. And if you think about homogenization, what we just looked at on this last map here, so many different countries around the world have adapted to use the same languages in many regions, right? For sake of ease, to make things easier on themselves, to make trade easier, to make communication simpler for people. But in a lot of ways, that's dangerous because although it's efficient, it's also contributing to the loss of so much culture. So many indigenous languages around the world are now endangered or have even become extinct. Extinct means there are no more native speakers. Simply put, there are no more native speakers. A dead language is different from extinct because it's still in use, but it's no longer the native language of those indigenous communities. So it may be taught, it may be used, but it is not an indigenous a language that is still used by those indigenous communities. So endangered, extinct, and dead languages. Here you can see language hotspots, some areas around the world where the threat to indigenous languages is quite high or quite low. So we talked about, for example, Mayan. The Mayan language is an indigenous language to Mesoamerica, Central America, and southern parts of Mexico. And there is a low threat level to those languages within the Mayan language family. However, other parts of the world we're seeing severe threats, such as the northwest regions of North America and the Pacific Northwest, specifically the Pacific Plateau. And we looked at some of those languages up in the regions of Alaska, and it's not really showing that on this map, but that would be included in these Pacific Northwest indigenous languages. Some of those are being protected and revived even in some cases, but there are many languages at risk, not just there, but all around the world. You can see many indigenous languages in different parts of sub-Saharan Africa as well, but there's a lower threat to many of those languages. The higher threat comes in usually more developed areas. So North America, you can see here down in Australia, okay, some of these more developed areas, as pop culture becomes more pervasive, then it's going to be more difficult for those folk cultures to protect and preserve their indigenous languages. A revived language, I mentioned this. Language revival is when a language is endangered or even in some cases extinct and it becomes revived. So it could be a case where a language is endangered and it's revived in that indigenous area, in the region that the language is actually native to. And this is what we saw happening in our video on Alaska early in the unit, where some of those Athabascan languages, those indigenous languages to not just Alaska, but also First Nation territories in Canada, are being kept alive. They're being revived, right, through educational programs, curriculum, as well as through electronic media, getting them on the radio and things of that nature. And sometimes, even if a language has become extinct, it can still be revived through old literature, old text, and even if it's considered dead, right, somebody is still using it. It is still living in some ways. It's just not a native language anymore. It's not used by the indigenous people who once used that language as an indigenous language. It's not used by its hearth culture, right? It's still used in some areas, but not by people who would actually consider that language native to their region. One example of a revived language, and a classic example, really big one, is Hebrew. Hebrew is a revived language that very much has seen its revival move along chronologically, historically speaking, with the creation of the state of Israel. And today, Hebrew is actually the official language of Israel. Finally, Welsh. Welsh is another example of a revived language, and I thought this chart was interesting because you can see here over on the right, it talks about some of the factors that influence the number of Welsh speakers, and it's things that you could potentially use in a free response question on the AP exam or on a future test, thinking about things like migration. If there's a large number of people moving out of a country or into a country, that could certainly impact the number of speakers of a language, right? Bilingual education. Are we actually teaching children these languages? All of these things could contribute to the endangerment of a language, the extinction of a language, or the revival of a language. So it's important to keep all of those cause and effect scenarios in mind when considering how language is impacted by the movement of people or the decisions we make in our schools, among other things. All right, everyone, that's it for the Unit 5 notes. We are all done with the Google Slides for our language unit here, and it's now time to start shifting our focus toward the Unit 5 test. That will take place next Wednesday. You'll have from 8 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon to complete it, so basically the normal school day, and it's 25 multiple choice questions long, 50 points, so 2 points per question. You will have 40 minutes to complete those 25 questions. 20 of those questions are going to be directly from Unit 5 content, whereas 5 of those questions will come from Units 1, 2, 3, and 4, just to make sure we're staying on top of our game there. To prepare for the test, here are the items I would suggest you use. The study guide that's in the Buzz agenda, the practice test that's included in Buzz for Unit 5, as well as any review sessions that are offered. So pay attention moving into next Monday and Tuesday, any Zoom sessions that I'm going to be hosting to review for Unit 5. And I would highly encourage you to attend those. They are not by any means mandatory, but highly, highly encouraged. And I guarantee you it's worth your time. So look out for that information. I hope to see you there. In the meantime, make use of the study guide and the practice test, and we'll work together to make sure that you crush this Unit 5 test next Wednesday. All right, everyone. Thank you, as always, for tuning in, and I'll see you for the reviews coming up soon. Don't miss those. So long.